Views like this in Grand Teton National Park aren't tough to come by. A place rich with scenery, diverse wildlife, and adventure. So why did it take me 3 separate trips here then to actually get to see these mountains? The answer has to do with timing and a little bit of bad luck. So join me on my adventure as I guide you through some of the best sights, hikes, and places to spot wildlife in Grand Teton National Park. This is Schwabacher Landing, one of the most recognizable views, best places to catch sunrise, and maybe even spot some wildlife in Grand Teton National Park. It was the first stop of the day on our latest trip here, and wouldn't you know, we were lucky enough to run into this guy out enjoying his lunch. Schwabacher Landing is reached by a simple turnoff from the main highway, and only a short walk from the parking area. That's the beauty of the Tetons. It takes about an hour to drive from one end of the park to the other, with some of the best views accessible right off the side of the road from your car. And plenty of opportunities for hikes, short and long, to even more spectacular scenery. Grand Teton really isn't that tough to reach. Located just below Yellowstone National Park, there's 3 major airports close by, including one in the park itself, the Jackson Hole Airport. It can be a little expensive to fly into though. So other options are Bozeman, Montana to the north, and Salt Lake City, Utah down to the south, which are both around a 4.5-hour car ride to the Tetons. So this past June, we landed in Salt Lake, grabbed our car, and started the drive up through Utah, Idaho, and finally into Wyoming, overnighting in the small town of ALPINE at the Bull Moose Lodge, only about an hour south of the Tetons. We chose late June to visit on our last trip for good reason. On our first visit to Grand Teton, we arrived closer to the end of May, and ended up getting snowed out for 3 days straight. There's only a few months of guaranteed good weather here, and when we visited for the first time in spring of 2019, rain and snow, including a freak blizzard, obscured our view of the mountains pretty much the entire time. While the Rockefeller Highway stays open year-round, the main park road closes from November through about the end of April. If you plan on visiting in May or early June, be prepared for some snow to still be on the ground. One place that also stays open year-round is the city that borders Grand Teton National Park directly to the south, Jackson, Wyoming. Great skiing in the winter and a tourist hotspot in the summer, you'll find restaurants, shopping, breweries, and plenty of expensive lodging in this Wild West town. Seriously, if you find anything for under $200 a night here, it's a bargain. We'll talk about some alternatives in just a little bit though. Town Square is probably the most popular area, where you can book a ride in horse-drawn carriages, check out the famous elk antler arches, and maybe even catch a Wild West show. Although I'm really not sure how authentic they are, or what exactly was going on in this one.
Poop your pants! Go poop your pants! Poop your pants!
Well, that was kind of weird. But moving on. You might be wondering about the name of this place. The story goes, when early 19th century French fur trappers first saw the mountains, they named them the Grand Tetons, which a quick Google search tells me means... Alright then. I guess the 1800s wilderness was a lonely place. If you're coming from Jackson, it only takes about 10 minutes to enter park boundaries. And just down the road is probably the most famous view in all of Grand Teton. About a 15-minute drive from the park's southern start. This is Mormon Row, home to the most photographed barn in America, the John Moulton Barn. And just down the road from it is what's probably the second most photographed barn in America, the T.A. MOULTON Barn. Occupied by Mormon homesteaders into the early 20th century, today Mormon Row is the most iconic view in all of Grand Teton National Park. Reach Mormon Row by turning off the Rockefeller Highway onto Antelope Flats Road. Drive for another couple minutes and you'll reach a crossroads. To your left is the parking area in the John Moulton Barn, and to your right, just a little ways down a dirt road, is the T.A. MOULTON Barn, and a few others. The best time to photograph the barns is sunrise, when first light casts deep orange and purple hues on the mountains in the background. Speaking of iconic views, there's one more in this immediate area worth checking out. So once you're done at the barns, hop back on the highway heading north for about 10 minutes, passing the turnoff for Schwabacher Landing and turning into a parking lot marked as the Snake River Overlook. This view gives you a higher vantage point of the valley, Snake River down below, and the Tetons off in the distance, of course. It's another great spot for sunrise, and also the place that Ansel Adams took his famous photograph of the mountains back in 1942. Before we venture too much further into the park, though, it's probably best we decide on a place to stay. The park is home to 3 lodges, one at Jenny Lake, Signal Mountain, and my personal favorite, at Jackson Lake up north, the Jackson Lake Lodge. Whether you stay here or not, I highly recommend stopping by for a drink at the Blue Heron Lounge and enjoying a view of the mountains. Prices at any of the lodges start at around $300 a night and up, and rooms go pretty quickly when they open for reservations about a year in advance. If you're looking to save some money, getting a spot at one of the park's 5 campgrounds is your best bet. Sites can be reserved 6 months in advance and cost $40 per night. You'll want to book the morning of that 6-month mark too at recreation.gov. Campsites go very quickly. The campgrounds are fairly well spread out, with Coulter Bay and Lizard Creek near the northern end of the park, Signal Mountain near the middle, Jenny Lake, and then my personal favorite, Gros Ventre, closer to the south. We got our tent up and site set for a week of camping, with a few touches of home added. The reason this one is my favorite is because of the heavy moose population here, one of the most coveted animals to see in Grand Teton National Park. They love this area. Seriously, if you stay here, you will see a moose, potentially even walking through your campsite, like what happened to us. If you do run into a moose, or any wildlife that isn't a predator, give them 25 yards of space, unless they sneak up on your tent. And if you spot an animal that could probably eat you, give it at least 100 yards of space. Spotting wildlife is a popular pastime for visitors to Grand Teton National Park, and no animal may be more iconic to the American West than the bison. While found all over Yellowstone up north, there's only 2 official herds within Grand Teton, but they're not that hard to find. Head up the highway for the turnoff for Elk Ranch Flats. This spot is pretty much where the bison herds here live. If you don't see them on your first stop, come back in a few hours. There's a good chance that they'll show up. Elk Ranch Flats is also a great place to spot pronghorn antelope, so keep an eye out for them too while you're here. On a personal note, this spot is special, as it's the inspiration for the Dan Trex logo. The mountains are obscured here a bit, but again, it took me 3 tries to actually see them, so I wasn't about to complain. And more on that in a minute. Because another famous Teton view that might be the best place to spot wildlife is just up ahead. This is Oxbow Bend, a meander of the Snake River. You can spot just about every kind of wildlife the Tetons have to offer here. From bald eagles to blue herons, beavers, elk, moose, and even on occasion, grizzly bears. I know I already said it once, but especially with grizzly bears, if you do happen to see one, give it at least 100 yards of space. If a lot of my wildlife shots in this video seem pretty close, it's because I'm filming them with an extremely long lens, with plenty of distance between myself and whatever animal it is. It was here at Oxbow Bend during our second visit in August of 2020 that we were extremely lucky to spot grizzlies every single day. And we did spend a lot of time here with them, since the view of the mountains was obscured the entirety of our trip. I figured for trip number 2 that we should visit later in the summer when there's really no chance of snow. And I was right, there was definitely no snow blocking our view, but something else entirely different. And that was wildfire smoke. Fire season runs from midsummer through the fall, and 2020 was a particularly bad year. Smoke from fires in California came blowing in literally the day we arrived in the Tetons, and never really left. Here's a photo from Signal Mountain that I took with the smoke, and here's what it looked like on a clear day during our most recent visit. So instead of shooting landscapes, I decided to focus a lot more on wildlife, especially these grizzlies. And these weren't just any bears, but the famous Grizzly 399 and her quadruplet cubs. And one of her other offspring, Grizzly 610, who had a pair of year-old cubs too. One or sometimes both sets of these grizzlies and their cubs would be on the hill across from Oxbow Bend literally every day we were here, before making their way across the road and into the river. The cubs have since moved on, or worse unfortunately. Another reason it's important to give bears space and not habituate them to humans. Oxbow Bend might not be a guaranteed grizzly spot, but if you're absolutely dying to see one of these amazing bears, head just up the road to our next spot. This is the turnoff for Pilgrim Creek Road, off of the Rockefeller Highway and just down the road from Oxbow Bend. Wide open meadows that go up to the tree line, amazing views of the Teton mountain range, a lot of orange traffic cones to prevent too many people from parking, bear activity warnings, and Pilgrim Creek Road itself frequently closed off to any kind of visitors. If you're dead set on seeing a grizzly bear, this is the place. The rule of thumb for most wildlife spotting is that your best chances are in the morning just after sunrise or just before sunset. So it might take a while, but if you hang out near the turnoff for Pilgrim Creek Road, you have a pretty good chance of spotting a grizzly. Chances are you'll be joined by a swarm of other visitors and several rangers desperately trying to do some crowd control. So we've covered a lot of the easy to reach viewpoints. But now it's time to dive into the park's interior, starting with one of its most popular spots. This is Jenny Lake, located closer to the park's southern half along the main road. It's easily the busiest spot in all of Grand Teton. Home to a visitor center, market, and lodge, the real attraction here is the lake itself. Jenny Lake is one of many pristine lakes found in the park. Visitors are free to hike the 7.9-mile loop trail around it, where they're likely to encounter all manner of wildlife, from black bears to deer to moose. All with some great views of the lake and the Tetons. The opposite side of Jenny Lake is where two of this area's best sights are found: Hidden Falls and Cascade Canyon. Those wishing to see either can hike around Jenny Lake to catch the trailheads on the opposite side, or if you want to save yourself some distance, 4 miles to be exact, catch the ferry across the lake, which offers round-trip rides for about $20. Here's a pro tip. Arrive early not only to beat the crowds, but to catch the first ferry of the day, which is only half the regular cost. From the boat dock and back, it's a simple 0.9-mile round-trip hike to Hidden Falls, and just over 200 feet of elevation gain. Following the same trail as Cascade Canyon to start, before branching off. So just follow the signs for Hidden Falls, and you'll be seeing these amazing cascades in no time. Speaking of cascades, don't do yourself the disservice of skipping the trail through this glacially carved canyon while you're on this side of Jenny Lake. Within, you'll find at least a little more solitude, tranquil ponds created by beaver dams, lush forests, and some amazing mountain views. From the boat dock, it's around a 9-mile round-trip hike to the end of the canyon and back, with just over 1,000 feet of elevation gain. You don't have to do all 9 miles if you don't want to, and some even argue that the best views of the canyon are found within the first couple miles or so of actually being in it. As for the elevation gain, most of that is right at the beginning of the hike. Nothing like getting the hard part done early. And it also takes you to a pretty amazing view of Jenny Lake. Simply follow the signs for Cascade Canyon and Inspiration Point. You'll know that you're in the steep part when you're taking the stairs that are built into the rock, which at the top pops you out at that amazing view I mentioned. This is Inspiration Point. You can see Jenny Lake pretty much in its entirety up here, and quite a bit of Jackson Hole Valley. Continue on. The trail will lead through forest for a bit longer, but it's all worth it once it opens up and you get your first proper view from within Cascade Canyon. If you're visiting in the morning, don't be surprised if there's some moose or black bear out on the trail. From this point, it's up to you how much further you want to go. We went about halfway before turning back, but at the end of the canyon, there are some additional trails that take you into the backcountry of Grand Teton National Park. This wouldn't be a Dan Trex video without a trip to this park's premier hike. And that's exactly what we had planned for tomorrow. But at around 9 miles round trip and 2,300 feet of elevation gain, we needed a solid dinner and a good night's sleep before tackling this unofficial trail up into the Tetons themselves. The hike in question is none other than Delta Lake. Once a little-known secret, the word is out in this place. It's now one of the most popular hikes in the entire park. First things first, download the AllTrails app to your phone if you don't already have it, and download the trail map for Delta Lake that you can use offline. You will need it. Since this is an unofficial hike, it requires navigating off-trail, which can get a little bit tricky. Link is in the description below to download the map. You start this hike from the Lupine Meadows parking area, taking the trail towards Surprise and Amphitheater Lakes. You'll want to arrive early because parking here fills up quickly. This trail branches off in several sections to other areas. Simply follow the signs for Surprise and Amphitheater until you hit the switchbacks. And enjoy some amazing views of the mountains along the way. We were even lucky enough to run into some wildlife too, like these marmots. And this mama black bear out with her 2 cubs. Once you hit the switchbacks, you'll want to pause and take note. You'll only be completing 6 of them before turning off trail. This is one of the tougher parts of the hike, with a good chunk of elevation gain. But the higher you go, the better the views get of Jackson Hole Valley as well as Bradley and Taggart Lakes down below. Once you reach the end of the 6th switchback, you'll want to stop. Here is where you'll veer off trail. While it's unofficial, enough people have taken this route to have blazed a relatively easy to follow trail. For now at least. Take the steps off of the switchbacks and follow the trail, using the map that you have downloaded if necessary. But obviously, it can't be that easy. The next step is tackling the boulder fields that you'll have to cross on this hike. Yeah, these aren't fun. A quick note, if you're doing this hike in May, there's going to be plenty of snow and the lake will probably still be frozen. Crampons and hiking poles will pretty much be a necessity. We visited in later June, and there was still just enough snow and ice to make things slippery. Either way, carefully maneuver across and then up this boulder field. A lot of these rocks can be loose, so you really want to watch your footing. From there, the trail can get a bit tough to follow. After this first boulder field, we reached another much sketchier boulder field. Instead of climbing across this one, we took a narrow dirt path on its left, heading upwards. Seriously, don't be afraid to commit to your downloaded map. At this point, you should have a decent view of the Grand Teton and a semi-decent idea of where to head. Unfortunately, it does require crossing another boulder field. Once you've navigated this, it's a steep climb upwards, but you'll eventually reach the final, even steeper hill that leads up to Delta Lake. As you can see, when we did it, this is the area that clearly had the most snow. Thankfully, I had my hiking poles and crampons to pull myself up with. And once you get to the top, that view immediately greets you. This is Delta Lake. Glacial runoff in the summer gives the lake its distinctive turquoise hue. It's a little deceiving, but you're actually seeing two mountains behind the lake. Disappointment Peak, which blends in a bit, and the Grand Teton itself. The lake was still partially frozen when I made it up here, but by the end of June or early July, it should be completely thawed. You're probably wondering if you could swim in it, right? The answer is yes, but I wouldn't stay in for too long. Again, this lake is fed by melting glaciers, so it never really warms up. Enjoy your time up here before starting the trek back down. The actual distance of this trail seems to vary from hiker to hiker, but in my experience doing it, we clocked around 9 miles round trip, and took us a solid 6 hours. With a lot of stops for filming and taking pictures though. 3 trips to finally see these mountains, and man, were they all worth it. The thing that I love about the Tetons is that there's so much packed into a reasonable and easily accessible area. Whether you want mountain views, a long day hike, or to go wildlife spotting, it's all here in Grand Teton National Park.